I'm Kevin Barrett with Helen Byniski. Welcome and happy Thanksgiving. Hey, Helen, how are you doing?
Pretty good. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone.
You know, those turkeys always taste a lot better if you wash down a red pill with your cranberry beverage or whatever the heck you're gobbling on Thanksgiving. And I hear the red pill fed turkeys, that is, they're turkeys that they actually feed with special organic and locally grown red pills, are tastier. And of course, those turkeys all realize that there's a conspiracy to slaughter them. So they're smarter too.
Yeah, they tell the other turkeys what's coming, and the other turkeys don't believe them. Oh, that's a loony tinfoil hat conspiracy theory. And the next thing they know, they end up on somebody's table. This is a cautionary tale we should all take to heart.
There you go. And I'm sure we'll all be thinking about that when we're on somebody's table, which we maybe already are for all I know. Anyway, we do have to issue our obligatory disclaimer, which is question everything and be sure to leave and go watch something like cat videos or whatever if you can't handle the truth, or at least if you can't handle media criticism, which is what we do here on False Flag Weekly News. And if you want to find out where we're broadcasting every week, because we do change every now and then, normally we're on Fridays. Today it's Thursday. Be sure and get on our email list, ffwn@noliesradio.org. Okay, well, now let's move on to the big stories this week. First big story from PBS, how to keep conspiracy theories from ruining your Thanksgiving. One way, of course, is to have the whole family in on the conspiracy to support conspiracy theories by being smart enough to understand that Building 7 didn't commit suicide. But that's not what they're saying at PBS. What do you think, Helen? Can you believe the kind of stuff that they are putting out here?
You know, this article was actually less offensive than some of these conspiracy theory complaining articles. They mentioned that, conspiracy theories are integral to a functioning media industry. Investigative journalism is a thing. People investigate conspiracies, etc. But of course, it's still ridiculous that they have to manage the narrative so closely that it's even, if you go home and see your family, if they start talking about, things that happen that they don't want you to know about, well, this is how you can shut them up, because we can't have information exchanged among members of the same family. That would be weird. I mean, it's just really kind of sad how.
Well, it actually wasn't. It wasn't quite that bad, though. They weren't necessarily, the headline and everything. The intro suggested they were going to teach you how to shut up those darn conspiracy theorists that are ruining your Thanksgiving. But then, when you actually read the article, which probably most people don't, it says that the way to combat people's faith in false conspiracy theories, right, which tells us that some of them are true, is that they suggest that the so-called non-conspiracy theorists should be talking about things like, like how do we know what we know? And the reasons that people believe what they do include the base rate, which is the tendency of people to believe whatever they're told. And of course, that's more relevant to believing what the authorities tell you than to not believing what the authorities tell you. Then you're supposed to discuss emotional attachment and tribalism, why people tend to believe things that their tribe believes. Of course, that's why we US Americans believe that our leaders are heroes, or at least not evil. Roosevelt didn't set up Pearl Harbor. Nobody in the CIA killed John F. Kennedy. And of course, 9/11 would never have been an inside job, right? So tribalism in affecting what you believe, that's actually true. And then how do you debate? Well, first you accept that you probably won't win, which is true. And then be nice to your opponent, which is true. And then do your homework. So they're telling people to do their homework on Building 7. Okay, guess what? You're going to end up with everybody raising that toast to 9/11 was an inside job if you follow PBS's advice.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting that they basically write off the believer in conspiracy thing by saying, you're not going to be able to change their minds, so you might as well just kind of write them off as hopelessly deluded and have a good time. I mean, I guess it's better than saying you need to hammer these people on their beliefs that they've researched much more closely than you have. But I did find it interesting how they misrepresent some common quote unquote conspiracy theories. Like, it's a conspiracy theory that the Iraq War was conducted by a bunch of globalists for the purpose of taking all the oil. And it's like, that's not actually.
No, it was about democracy and human rights, right?
Oh yeah. No, it was about the Greater Kurdistan Project and the Greater Israel Project. Yeah. It wasn't
that too.
About oil.
Yeah.
And so they misrepresent the thing, so that they can't even present a real conspiracy theory outright, because they know people recognize hey, actually that sounds pretty plausible. So they have to come up with weird stuff about chemtrails, mind control.
Mm-hmm.
Really.
Yeah, the way they write it up is so strange. Most Americans, approximately 55%, believe in popular and unfounded conspiracy theories, such as that the Iraq War was a globalist plot to control oil reserves, or the suggestion that airplane chemtrails are used for mind control. I mean, how
Those are
can you
really
parse a
weird.
sentence like that?
Yeah, those are just really weird ones to pick. I mean, normally they would at least say something about like JFK or 9/11 or anything like that. But I guess because it was recently the anniversary of JFK's murder, so they figure, maybe let's not touch that one. And people are starting to pay attention to. I mean, I think everybody except Wikipedia has woken up to that one, but it's ridiculous.
Yeah, I think the people that they task with writing this stuff, have a really tough time, and so that's why you end up with these kinds of incoherent things. But this one, when you actually get to the meat and potatoes, as it were, the turkey and dressing of the article, it's actually right. I mean, the basic three ways that you should discuss these conspiracy theories in terms of trying to get at the truth that they give you are essentially correct, and all of them lead you to understand how it is that people have false beliefs. The only thing is it's the tribal establishment beliefs that are the false beliefs in most cases. So anyway, happy Thanksgiving. Enjoy reading PBS's craziness. And let's move on to more looks at sorts of things that most people probably wouldn't want to discuss with their families around the dinner table. How about war on Iran for Israel? Finian Cunningham says that starting a war with Iran would be a get out of jail card for Bibi Netanyahu. If he leaves as prime minister, he goes straight to jail. So the longer he stays in, the better for him by far. And what's the best way to stay in? It's to keep ratcheting up tensions with Iran, keep murdering Palestinians. 34 killed, 111 wounded in the last couple of weeks in just massacring people in Gaza. No Israelis have been hurt by these bottle rockets that get fired back. And so I don't know, Helen, do you think we're going to get a full-scale Israeli war on Iran to keep Netanyahu out of jail?
I think that Bibi would go that far. He is definitely that unhinged. I mean, he has absolutely no connection to reality or repercussions or anything like that. I mean, just the idea that these crappy little rockets that can't even really, their trajectory can't be guided. It's not like they're a cruise missile or something. And the idea that these should require such massive retaliation is a little bit pathetic. But yeah, Bibi and Trump are both kind of, I think they've got like not a suicide pact, but like an impeachment pact where if either of them looks like they're going to get kicked out of office, then it's time to bring out the big guns and throw in the towel on having a peaceful world.
And Trump has a kind of a similar situation going. And Gilad Atzmon and I were discussing this Netanyahu trying to stay out of jail and so on Press TV's debate show. I always enjoy the debate show. I often get a Zionist or a State Department flack to debate, but in this case, I got somebody I generally agree with about many things, Gilad Atzmon. But yeah, it's interesting that Trump too is, he could end up in a situation where if he leaves office, he might be going to prison. And he might be in a situation where he thinks if he could rally the country behind him by getting all the liberal Democratic Party war hawks on his side by getting into a big war, he might have the same motivations as Netanyahu.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's true because the left, quote unquote, the Democrats rather, they're not. I wouldn't classify them as the left, but the Democrats are big fans of war, if possible, even bigger fans than the Republicans these days. So that's the only time that he ever gets a pass from the mainstream media is when he's bombing somebody.
That's right. And so speaking of ratcheting up tensions with Iran, which is, of course, the place that the Israelis and their American lapdogs are interested in creating problems, this week we had all sorts of craziness going on over in Iran, where apparently CIA-funded color revolution types torched a bunch of banks and some government buildings. Supposedly 100 banks in Iran were torched, which is funny because Iran is one of the very few countries whose banking system isn't totally controlled by the Rothschild crime syndicate. You would think that people everywhere else in the world would burn down their banks long before the Iranians would, but it just goes to show that money can buy mind control. In any case, the Iranian authorities put down these color revolution riots thanks to the Basiji force. And for people who want to understand why none of this regime change stuff on Iran, whether color revolution or invasion could ever possibly work, read Ramin Mazahari's article on Iran's Basiji, B-A-S-I-J, the Basij force. Just Google that up. It's Ramin Mazahari, M-A-Z-A-H-E-R-I. He's the Press TV Paris correspondent, and his article that Saker and others have reproduced on the Basij force shows that this many, many millions, I think 10 million plus Basij volunteers whose lives, they're from poorer and working class communities. Their lives are much better because they're in the Basij. It gives them all sorts of networks and some basic income if they do certain kinds of work. It's a kind of socialism. It's grounded in Islam. And with those 10 million plus Basij volunteers, there is just no way that the CIA color revolution people are ever going to have any luck inside Iran. And there's also no way anybody could ever invade or occupy Iran. You've got, 10, 20 million people already organized to form a resistance. You thought Iraq was tough. You thought Afghanistan was tough. You try going into Iran and you're going to have some serious problems.
Yeah, I have an article on my site as well called Insulting Iran's Intelligence that I wrote last time they tried this color revolution stuff. I think it was the late months of 2017. And it's just, they keep trying the same thing and it just doesn't work because, I mean, just the fact that they are having these pro-government protests to combat the anti-government protests. Where in the US would you ever see a pro-government protest?
Especially like so much bigger than the anti-government protests. The anti-government protests are, a few thousand people that quickly break out into riots. The pro-government protests are millions. I was actually in the middle of a pro-government protest of 5 million people on the anniversary of the revolution. And they're all running, 5 million people with signs saying death to America. And I'm walking around like, oh, where are you from? American. Oh, that's okay. Don't worry about it. We don't hate you. It's your government we have the problem with. So
yeah, and that's something that our government tries to distract from, is that when the Iranians are saying death to America, they're not referring to American citizens. They actually like American citizens. That they're referring to the government, and they're able to separate the government from the people. It's a pretty easy thing to do. But the one thing I did want to bring up is that it's very telling the way they go after the bank, because it's one of the few non-Rothschild controlled central banks. When they have these color revolutions and they succeed in overthrowing the government, so often it's like the first thing the new government does. And you would think if the condition of the country is so bad that they have to overthrow the government, well, maybe they would focus on something like more basic than installing a central bank. But I think it was in Venezuela and Libya both that one of the first actions of the new U.S.-backed government when they overthrew Chavez briefly in 2002 was to set up a central bank, because that's what people really need if they're that's what I said. Both places. And it's very telling. So that's when you think, the people are suffering, they need a central bank that will solve their problems. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, it's ironic to have the Rothschilds and George Soros paying people to burn down banks. I mean, that could come back to bite them if they don't watch out. But anyway, the Iranians are happy that their patriotic people and their Basiji people and so on have got a lid on these riots. But they're pretty annoyed at the way the U.S. and Israel just constantly are sponsoring terrorism in Iran. Almost 20,000 Iranian civilians have been murdered by U.S. and Israeli-supported terrorists in Iran over the past couple of decades. And so they're also not happy that Netanyahu is bombing Iranian targets in Syria, although perhaps with less success than he's boasting about. And so they're warning the U.S. and Israel not to cross any red lines. They're quite ready and willing to defend themselves. And they have escalation capability here, meaning that they can keep on, raising the ante. Whatever is done to them, they can do something roughly on that level, right up to they can take out all of the U.S. bases and embassies and so on in the region. They could destroy Dimona and make Israel uninhabitable if they had to. They don't need nuclear weapons to have a deterrent. And so they're warning Trump and Netanyahu against this stay out of jail by starting a war with Iran plan.
Yeah, they could also sink our aircraft carriers that are just sitting there like big dumb blobs of like basically having a target painted on their backs. And that's what the U.S. and Israel just trying to goad Iran into attacking so that they can then go to town. But of course, the Pentagon has run the simulation many times, and Iran always wins, or doesn't win. But the U.S. does not win. That's the important part. The U.S. will not win a war against Iran, especially if other countries will come into the war on the side of Iran, probably China. Russia has said that it doesn't want to get involved, but that if it has to, it will. And I think it's funny that the Israeli media reported this warning about red lines, except it had the Iranians threatening to destroy their enemies, but it took out the if you cross red lines. There was no if. It was just, yeah, Iranians are going to destroy you. So we got to do something. They're so predictable.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's funny how the only country that really has a serious problem with Iran is Israel. And the reason for that is that Iran's Islamic Republic has always been committed to liberating Palestine. Other than that, there's really no reason that the US and Europe could not be just maintaining normal relations with Iran. And that kind of illustrates the power of the Zionist lobby, which is a minuscule percentage of the people in the US and Europe, but they apparently have vastly disproportionate power. But we're not supposed to talk about that or we'll be accused of being racist or something. Well, another illustration of this disproportionate power is what's going on with Jeremy Corbyn in the UK. We're seeing hilarious. It's getting past the point of absurdity here, where Corbyn and his party have always said that they're going to cancel arms sales to Israel, or at least the ones that are being used to massacre civilians. And, he keeps apologizing and changing his mind and saying now we're not going to boycott all Israeli products, just the ones from the occupied territories. He keeps backtracking, keeps apologizing. But as we see in the next headline, they won't take an apology for an answer. The more he apologizes, the more they insist that he refuses to apologize. And so here they had him on an interview with Andrew Neil on the BBC. And I guess the interview was conducted where Corbyn was being dangled upside down by his heels out of a fourth-story window. Will you apologize? Will you apologize? And he never gave them what they thought would be a proper apology. I guess they wanted the John Cleese Fish Called Wanda apology. I don't know. But, I mean, what do you make of this, Helen?
It's like I said before, Corbyn, his name will go down in history as a term meaning to cave into bullying in such a way that it makes the bully come back stronger and bully all your friends. And it's basically the most counterproductive thing in the world. I mean, for all his, if he is even taking a stand now, I've heard he actually has apologized and they're just like pretending he hasn't or something. But it's ridiculous because he, in the beginning, he screwed up by caving completely. All he did was say that, Palestinians should have a state. And they try to blow it out of proportion as if labor is a hotbed of anti-Semitism, when they've looked at the statistics and the other party, the Conservative Party, is much more like the percentage in labor is like 0.001% or something, and they're trying to make it that, under Corbyn, I love how Haaretz just reports that as a fact. Under Corbyn, anti-Semitism in the Labor Party has gone through the roof. Yeah, it's gone from like one dude to two dudes. I mean, it's ridiculous. Yeah, so Corbyn is becoming synonymous with just completely like spineless. He really needs to, I mean, unfortunately he's put his foot in it by not doing this at first, but I mean, come on, man. Have some principles. At least they're going to not sell weapons to Israel, right? I mean, I'm sure they'll get rid of that if they get elected as well.
Yeah, at some point, Corbyn, I guess he'll either have to stop apologizing, genuinely stop apologizing and start going after these people, or I suppose he could just completely knuckle under and basically do the John Cleese routine, to give the long apology and then change his policies and say, okay, from now on, we are going to support the massacre of civilians in Gaza and Israeli plans to launch a false flag war on Iran to keep Netanyahu out of prison, and on and on and on. So I suppose that's one way he could solve the problem, but I don't know. They probably just dangle him out of another window later. So I think it's better to just not apologize, which is the approach I took when the ADL this week put me on the short list of social media accounts that should have been removed long ago. I'm up there with David Duke, Louis Farrakhan, Richard Spencer, Gilad Atzmon, Kevin McDonald, Allison Chablos, Tex Mars, Israel Shamir, and Gordon Duff of Veterans Today, where I also write. So two of us from VT, I guess that's kind of a compliment. And I know you're not a huge Gordon Duff fan, Helen, but still, that's still quite an accomplishment. So I didn't exactly apologize. I did write a response to the ADL, and I hope they enjoy it.
Yeah, I mean, the chutzpah on display here is so immense. Like, who is the ADL to say who should have and not have a social media account? And also the crimes of the people on this list, including yourself, are so like milk toasty. I mean, to hear them tell it, you would think that people were burning crosses on Jews' lawns or something, and this is not happening. This is people expressing their constitutionally protected right to free speech on a platform that unfortunately happens to prefer ADL dollars to the constitutional rights that Americans are supposed to have, and even that people in other countries should have under like general human rights law, international law, stuff like that. But nope, we can't have anybody getting offended. Sacha Baron Cohen is such a, like, I don't even know what the word you would use, but for somebody who's,
if anybody's a racist,
yeah, for someone who's made his career making fun of,
yeah.
So someone who's made his career making fun of ethnic minorities in extremely grotesque and insensitive ways, for him to come out and say that, oh, YouTube's a hotbed of anti-Semitism and we have to get rid of all these people, is so hypocritical. It's just nauseating. I mean, I watched that speech and everyone's cheering for this speech, and oh, it was so, yeah, Hitler would have put ads on Facebook, and all the minorities would have died. And what? No. Hitler wrote an editorial in the New York Times. How about we go after the New York Times for giving space to dictators? But no, I mean, the problem is that, yes, the media has always engaged in demagoguery and whatnot, but the problem with social media is that it democratized the thing so that the average guy could engage in demagoguery, and they can't win unless the stage is slanted.
Well, they have a lot of researchers at ADL. It's a $1 billion organization. And so they looked through the many, thousands of hours of broadcasting that I've done since 2006, and the millions of words that I've published in books and blog posts and articles and so on. And the worst thing they could find that I said during all of that was I mentioned the phrase clandestine Zionist power. And I said something about some of the detail. I questioned some of the details, or said that some of the details of the sacred Holocaust narrative are questionable. Well, I'm sure some people might not like that, but if that's the worst and most offensive, hateful thing I've said in millions of words of talking and writing, I don't know. I think I should be on the short list for sainthood.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, is that all these, like I said, all these crimes that are holding up, these are really relatively uncontroversial statements, and they're proving your point by putting out a list like this. Because if what you were saying was not true, then why would the ADL be deciding who can and cannot have a social media account? Especially, like, they're listing the people's number of followers. Alison Chablaz has like 500 followers. So you're going after an account with 500 followers because you think it's going to turn every social media user into some sort of raging anti-Semite. And this is the other point, is that under the ADL's wide, enormous definition of anti-Semitism that basically encompasses everything that could ever possibly be misconstrued as an insult to this ethnic group, Theodore Herzl, the founder of Zionism, would count as an anti-Semite, because he said that Jews cannot be loyal to the governments in which they live, because they're loyal to Israel as an idea then, and Israel as a country now.
That's the dual loyalty canard.
Yeah, exactly. That's a dual loyalty canard, and that makes Theodore Herzl an anti-Semite. It eats itself. They can't continue this unless they just want to be mocked ridiculously.
Well, they have a pretty good scam going, raising billions of dollars to put out this kind of goofy list. I don't know how they really chose us. There are a lot of people that you would think that would have been on that list, not only because they've said things that would be construed as offensive, but because they've done good work and had huge audiences. But it seems like just it's kind of random. I like most of the people on this list, actually. Some, I don't, they tend to be sort of nationalist leaning types that I'm not really in agreement with philosophically in many cases. But it's a great honor to be on the list nonetheless. So just for background on the ADL, anybody who doesn't know what the ADL is and where they're coming from should read Ron Unz's piece, published a little while back. So it's not from this week, but it's still worth going back and revisiting. He points out that the ADL was founded after a rich, powerful Jew from Atlanta, a guy named Leo Frank, raped and murdered a 13-year-old named Mary Fagan. And it's clear, well, it's 99% clear that he did it. And essentially they raised vast sums of money, the equivalent of billions today, to get him off and to blame an innocent black guy for doing it. And the Nation of Islam has done a terrific job on this in the third volume of their secret history of the relationship between blacks and Jews. And Ron Unz's piece really covers how the ADL, after raising billions to defend a child rapist and murderer, they went on to set up an intelligence organization that depends on bribing police. All over the country, they bribe corrupt mafiosi police and get files on political activists, mostly people on the liberal left side. And they got caught in San Francisco in 1993. So this is really a kind of a thought police organization. And Unz finishes by saying that the ADL was founded a century ago to prevent a Jewish rapist and murderer from being held legally accountable for his crimes. Over the decades, it metastasized into a secret political police force, not dissimilar to the Stasi. but with its central goal seems to be the maintenance of overwhelming Jewish control of a society that is 98% non-Jewish. Those are pretty tough words. You'd think that they would put Ron Unz on their list instead of me.
Didn't they put him on the list in the past? But at any
no,
rate,
they've only put out one little milquetoast, not slap on the wrist for Ron, even though he's said all sorts of things that are way beyond what I've said. And he's he said them better, frankly, in many cases.
Yeah, I mean,
but they won't touch it.
That might have something to do with it, is that these articles are so thorough, so well researched, and presented so calmly and objectively that they probably just don't want to call attention to him, because an article like this is very damaging. Sometimes you hear people say, oh, the ADL has really gone downhill. They've become such a defamatory organization, and they don't realize that this was what the ADL was founded to do. It's not a question of going downhill. The Anti-Defamation League has always been completely unnecessary if you want to talk about what the organization was originally founded to do. And you just have to look at, okay, so an organization gets caught spying on ordinary American citizens by bribing police officers to take files on activists. Well, ordinarily, an organization would be punished for doing that. Maybe someone would at least, if not go to jail, at least be fined, and at least have the organization broken up or their nonprofit status taken away or something. But in this case, no, the ADL was rewarded. They're now used to train FBI officers and other law enforcement in sensitivity and not offending people as they investigate them, because they don't investigate them. The ADL makes sure of that. That's kind of half the point of the sensitivity training, is don't go around investigating Zionist organizations, buddy. You might find yourself on a watch list. So it's just ridiculous that this is the organization that we entrust our speech to, because they are evil through and through.
Well, I'm glad I'm on their watch list. And even though normally in False Flag Weekly News, we probably each week we only would have a couple of stories that they would even really strongly dislike. But I think maybe I'm not doing a good enough job of that. I need to focus on more stuff that they would dislike. So this week, we're going to try to up the ante a little bit. And our story list includes probably quite a bit more stories that they would dislike than we would in a normal week, because they've pissed me off. Okay, so how about this one? This is a great one from Allison Weir at If Americans Knew. The World Jewish Congress, billionaires, oligarchs, and global influencers for Israel gathered together here with, led by the Rothschilds. Estimates of their net worth range from 400 billion up to 700 trillion, which, if true, means that they do run the world. It's quite a piece. I mean, this to see who rules you, see who you're not allowed to criticize unless the ADL comes after you. And the people at that gathering are probably the people who rule the world. And like Gilad says, it's not a conspiracy theory, because they're not conspiring. It's not secret. They're doing it all right out in the open.
Yeah, I liked Gilad's statement on that, because it's true. These people are, they know that they're untouchable. So they, use the entire Jewish people as a human shield, saying, oh, yep, if you insult us, you're insulting all Jews, and that's anti-Semitic. Well, no, actually it's not, because the vast majority of Jews don't benefit from this kind of open power grabbing.
Yeah, my Jewish friends have never been to a gathering like this, that's for sure.
Yeah, exactly. Neither have mine. And it's like this, the fact that they still get away with this just is proof that they exercise, if not control, because you can't use the word control, that's anti-Semitic. Now you've got like Fiona Hill in the impeachment saying that just mentioning George Soros is anti-Semitic, even though his participation in color revolutions, like the Maidan Square uprising in Ukraine, is a documented fact, but you can't say that because it's anti-Semitic. So they're just, I mean, it's so naked and it's so obvious, and it's like in 1984, the party's power comes from the ability to make you say that 2 + 2 is 5.
Of course. And it's we're living in a plutocracy. The system is set up so that money runs everything. And if a particular group of people who have some kind of ethnic tie have a disproportionate amount of money, obviously they're going to have disproportionate power. I mean, that's not particularly controversial or conspiratorial. That's just reality. And it's not just these folks. I mean, the people at this gathering are probably, I don't think there are any Orthodox Jews there, but there's an Orthodox community too. And in the next slide, we see that it has power as well. They're opening up their wallets for Trump. This Hasidic rabbi from Crown Heights, Yassi Saralik, or whatever his name is, says that Trump is the first Hasidic president. And they're saying that if he ever gets in trouble here, he can flee to Israel, which doesn't have an extradition treaty, of course, which is why they created Israel in the first place, and be president there, or prime minister, I suppose. So anyway, it's the whole, the Jewish community is not monolithic by any means. There are these super billionaire and trillionaire, relatively secular, or some whisper Illuminati Satanist people who were at the World Jewish Congress. And then there are these Orthodox Jews who, like religiously, Gilad Atzmon thinks are actually less toxic in a lot of ways, but they're the force behind Trump, or one of the big forces. They and their Russian mob friends, the Chabad people. So these people, they have a number of different groups going that are propping up different parts of the power structure.
Well, there are different kinds of Orthodox groups. I mean, there are some Orthodox groups that are completely against the idea of Israel or Zionism in general, because it's if you actually look at what their scripture says, they're not supposed to be in the Jewish promised land until the Messiah comes, and according to them, he hasn't shown up yet. So this fact that they're presenting it as a unified front, and if you say anything bad about Israel or Zionism, you're insulting all Jews. It's just ridiculous. It's not the case. You're actually insulting Jews by saying that they are all part of this genocidal organization that is the Zionist entity.
Right, but what really pisses me off is the mainstream excludes Jewish voices that are speaking common sense on any of these things, and it creates a fake spectrum where the liberal Jewish opinion is represented by the likes of, advance the slide, Thomas Friedman. Thomas Friedman, he's a liberal Jew, right? Here he is bragging about how wonderful the 9/11 wars have been. He's happy that they murdered 27 million Muslims on the basis of a series of lies, including a lie about who really blew up the Trade Center, which was his Israeli friends. I think he probably knew about it ahead of time. His wholehearted support of the response to 9/11 shows that he knows what's going on, and he's so attached to Israel that he's happy that 27 million Muslims were murdered to help provide Israel with security by living in a neighborhood that's been totally destroyed.
Yeah, he's just such a scumbag, because he's talking about how, pluralism is great for the Arab world and blah, 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 blah. How about pluralism for Israel, dude? How about that? No mention of that. If that happens, then the world is over and it's no good. But no, what's good for me is not good for thee. And he's just such a smug little hypocrite. I don't understand why anybody would believe that he is some sort of liberal voice. I mean, he's talking about what about the future of the NY Times op-ed page? Bret Stephens is not neocon enough for us. It's like, dude. This sort of view does not represent a large segment of any population, not Jewish, not media people. This is just they prop up people like this to make it seem like there's some sort of consensus that these wars are a good thing and that it's all right to murder millions of people for your misguided philosophy. But no, he's just a useful idiot.
Well, in this speech at Temple Emmanuel in New York, he did give one quote that's both accurate and memorable, and that was, he said, "My view was that on 9/11, we got hit with the distilled essence of all the pathologies going on out back." And if out back means sort of behind the curtain, the folks who really run the world, we sure did get hit by them. And I think he's in with them, and I think he's still proud that he is. And that's what passes for a left liberal Jew these days. And we can't hear anything about Rabbi Weiss or Gilad Atzmon. We can't hear anything about Philip Weiss, the former New York Times journalist. And there are a long list of others, people from Jewish backgrounds who are telling the truth and standing up for justice. But no, they're not in the mainstream. So they've got a lock on the mainstream, and that's why we're criticizing the mainstream here on False Flag Weekly News. And then there's a science article that I included in this list just for fun. We've had some debates on my radio show about Greg Felton's book, The Host and the Parasite, which argues, it uses this biological metaphor to describe Zionist power in the West, and especially the United States, and culminating in the 9/11 false flag. I don't think the ADL is going to like this. And Webster Tarpley gave Greg Felton a tongue lashing for using this biological metaphor, which Webster found genocidal and hateful and hurtful and all of that. So I've had radio shows discussing this and giving Greg the chance to defend himself. In any case, given what's going on, I can see why Greg finds it okay to use this metaphor. Personally, I wouldn't, but part of the problem is it feeds sort of the racial view of things, the idea that we humans are just biological communities that are always fighting with each other for control and power and wealth and so on. And there's a level of truth to that, but it's not the whole story. And our souls depend on our pushing back against the downside of our biological programming. So anyway, what do you think, Helen?
Yeah, I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with the parasite narrative. It's not like they're saying that all Jews are parasites. It's that there is a certain group of elite, powerful, wealthy Zionists who are doing some sort of number on the minds of the American political body to make it do things that are toxic to the entire nation. I mean, I don't think that you have to put race into it at all. I think that that's a kind of a red herring. I thought that this article was really interesting. And I mean, one could do an entire show on the parasitic nature of the Israeli lobby, because it really, I thought that what was interesting about that article is they're looking at what exactly these parasites do to make these bugs drown themselves. And they're thinking that it might have something to do with the proteins that control memory. So if you look at what's going on in America, the national memory is about 5 seconds. I mean, people just don't remember that, less than 20 years ago, we were lied into war in Iraq with this weapons of mass destruction thing. And so maybe, lying about Syria's president Assad gassing his own people to start another war. It's like, maybe you should remember the last time that happened. Or lying about Russia stealing the election. Maybe you should remember the last time that lies were used to study war. People just don't remember anything. There are so many false flag events that have been used to kick off wars, from the Maine to the Gulf of Tonkin to they keep trying to do this with Iran, but it's not taking off, because when you cry wolf 1,000,000 times, no one believes you. And the parasite metaphor is apt, and it doesn't apply to the entire Jewish people at all, but it definitely does apply to this certain 0.0001% or whatever. I don't know what the actual numbers are, but they are causing America to do suicidal things.
I think we have a problem with the whole power elite, not only the ethnically Jewish element, but they are disproportionately problematic, no question about it. And so let's keep pissing off the ADL. Let's talk about Ghislaine Maxwell, the daughter of Mossad super spy Robert Maxwell, and pedophile enabler for Jeffrey Epstein, the allegedly suicided Mossad operative whose job was to collect nasty images of very powerful people so they could be blackmailed by Israel. And this article I thought was quite good. None of the mainstream articles will ever touch the fact that Mossad and obviously Maxwell, Ghislaine, worked for Israel. This is a pretty interesting article. And the one new piece of information I hadn't heard was there's a new Ghislaine witness, Maria Farmer, who says that Ghislaine used to cruise around in places like Central Park. I was with her a couple of times in the car. She would say, stop the car, and she would dash out and get a child and bring it to Jeffrey. Yeah. Maria Farmer says that Ghislaine Maxwell has threatened her life if she talks about this.
Yeah, I had heard that one before. What I found interesting about this article is that towards the end, there's someone who's just kind of laughing it off, but saying that, oh yeah, my mother thinks that, wherever Ghislaine is and wherever Epstein is, that Epstein and Robert Maxwell are just, they're still alive and they're laughing it up somewhere. Well, if Jeffrey Epstein is still alive, it was because they pulled a similar thing to Robert Maxwell, who was infamously pushed off his boat by the Mossad. Of course, they don't mention that in this article at all. The word Mossad will
disappeared off a boat, never to be seen again.
Yeah, just like he had a heart attack and fell off a boat. Yeah, a guy who had been driving boats for years, and they switched out the crew for that specific trip. Why did they do that? Oh, right, because the Mossad had discussed it thoroughly, and I think they weighed doing some sort of elevator malfunction at his building, except that it would have killed other people. They didn't want to do that. And the thing was that Robert Maxwell made the terrible mistake of trying to blackmail the blackmailers. He can't blackmail the Mossad. He wanted them to pay his debts, or else he was going to spill on all the stuff he knew. Obviously, that couldn't happen. So either Epstein did something similar and he had to be gotten rid of, or Epstein was smuggled out of jail. Of course, nobody talks about Epstein is still alive. The Epstein didn't kill himself as far as the sort of controlled opposition media will go. But this was an interesting story. They say that they seem to be sort of pleading with the U.S. authorities to whip out Ghislaine if they actually have something on her. But I think that the U.S. authorities are not interested in pursuing Ghislaine because she has dirt on too many of them. Why would they shoot themselves in the foot like that?
So they're not playing Where's Waldo trying to find her. They're actually looking the other way. Well, the article does say the FBI knows where she is, which suggests that the FBI isn't interested in picking her up, even though she's threatening to kill people for telling about her helping Jeffrey Epstein get hold of children.
That was a long time ago, though. That wasn't a recent thing, she said. Maria Farmer, that interview? Yeah, she was talking about when she was still with...
Right. I guess I'd forgotten about it if I'd heard of it. But I mean, that's just one of the issues that you would think that she would be dragged in by the FBI over. So why is it that our government won't go after criminals like these, like the 9/11 criminals? Well, maybe it's because there's blackmail material. That's what Jeffrey Epstein was all about, was helping Israel get blackmail material. Just as the NSA, which gives all of its raw data to Israel, gets blackmail material on people like Angela Merkel, all the other important people in the world, likewise, they get blackmail material on other politicians as well. Therefore, American leaders will not stand up and go after the people who murdered 3,000 Americans on 9/11. Maybe Tulsi Gabbard's an exception. Who knows what blackmail material they do or don't have on her. In any case, she is going after the Saudi side of 9/11, which is a very minor side. And so far, she hasn't talked about the controlled demolitions of the skyscrapers, which is really the big smoking gun here. So AE 9/11 Truth, the architects and engineers, are asking people to contact Tulsi and see if she will go there. What do you think? Is she going to go there, Helen?
I very much doubt it. I mean, maybe if they push her too far, she'll say something, but I mean, she's a very politically savvy woman. I don't think that she would torpedo her chances at serving in any American government by at least, pulling on the Saudi thread a little too hard, and then the whole Israeli inner level sort of flops out and for all to see. I don't think she would do that. Maybe she will surprise me and surprise us and go crusading for the forces of good, but she's a politician. I mean, what do you expect?
Right. Well, so we're living in a world where high rises can just explode into pyroclastic nuclear weapon style clouds of sub 100 micron dust, which is talcum powder, and disappear at free fall acceleration and have nothing there where the building used to be, and 1,000+ people inside with not even the tiniest bone sliver or remnant of a fingernail to be identified by DNA, totally reduced to powder. And yet high-rise fires just keep on breaking out and buildings on not exploding into pyroclastic billows of talcum powder. Just happened in Minneapolis.
Oh gosh, it's, the thing is that the laws of physics were suspended that day. It was, you might not have gotten the memo, but some people did. I heard it was through the Odigo messaging service. Laws of physics are to be suspended on September 11, 2001 for maintenance. Buildings might explode without warning. Victims will be pulverized, and complete random blame will be attributed to people by Israeli politicians that we have no desire to listen to. So what do you expect? I mean, the laws of physics, they usually are in effect, but sometimes they just go away.
And you're not going to find this on mainstream media. You're not going to hear this from mainstream politicians. So who are you going to hear the 9/11 truth from? Well, of course, you can tune into False Flag Weekly News, or you can listen to the Satanist military propaganda expert, Michael Aquino. Michael Aquino is the guy whose claim to fame was being kicked out of the Church of Satan for being too evil. That's quite a thing to put on your resume. He was implicated in the Presidio daycare scandal, where dozens and dozens of children came down with venereal disease. And it was very clear to the San Francisco Police Department, which of course is in the pay of the ADL, that there was a problem there and that Aquino was in on it. He was arrested and somehow he was let go. The military leaned on them to let him go. He's a colonel. And he's a top-level U.S. psychological warfare expert. Some say he headed the entire U.S. military psychological warfare program at one point. But here he is in an interview from last June, sounding just like an average 9/11 truther, except he's a little too sure about what happened. Like the passengers, not to put too fine a point on it, were disposed of. They were killed. He's talking about the planes with passengers landing at an airbase. And so anyway, what do you think? Is this guy have inside knowledge, or is he
He doesn't sound like an average 9/11 truther at all. He's a no-planer. He's a government, a cognitive infiltrator, let's say. I mean, he's the master of psychological warfare. Of course, he's going to be sowing discord in the 9/11 truth movement by coming with this no-plane crap. I mean, duh. So yeah, I wasn't really surprised to hear this from him. That's kind of a stupid red herring that people get sucked down pursuing. Oh yeah, there are holograms, and yeah, totally. Everybody saw the same hologram, and it looked just like a plane because, of course, they had the technology to do that. And the plane-shaped holes just kind of, they shape charges. And I mean, in that case, you got to go with Occam's razor. Sorry.
Yeah, he sounds like a creepy, soft-spoken version of Jim Fetzer to a certain extent.
Yes.
And I like Jim. I'm sorry to compare you to the guy who got kicked out of the Church of Satan for being too evil, Jim, if you're watching. Anyway, let's move on to the next story. The pardon of Ed Gallagher, or Trump is restoring all of his military decorations or whatever. Gallagher is this Navy SEAL who was murdering women and children and executing captives and threatening the lives of his fellow Navy SEALs who didn't like it. And so this creep is now has been basically protected by Donald Trump. And Donald Trump has a weird relation with military people. Trump himself went to military school, but never served in the military. He avoided Vietnam because he was apparently Roy Cohn's boy toy, as reflected in this picture from one of the decadent and depraved parties where the young Donald Trump, a very handsome young man at that time, was apparently servicing the Meyer Lansky mob's man who ran New York, Roy Cohn, who later sent his boy toy Trump up in the money laundering business, which was Trump's job for his entire career until he became president of the United States.
Not sure exactly what that has to do with the military, but I love this picture though.
The veterans are angry about this.
Yeah, okay, I get it. Yeah, no, I mean, the fact that they're just now realizing that the president uses the military as a tool for massacres. I mean, where have you been for the last 100 years? That's what the one thing that I have to give Trump credit for is for pulling up the curtain on a lot of nasty stuff that goes on in America, just in politics, in military, in government, in everywhere. People didn't even care about this stuff until Trump came along and started doing what every single president before him was doing. So yeah, thank you, Trump, for calling attention to the hypocrisy of the chattering class.
Okay, well, speaking of hypocrisy, how about the avatars of political correctness going after professors who say politically incorrect things? I had problems when I talked about 9/11 when I was in the university. Well, here's a guy, Eric Rasmussen, having problems for retweeting a Lance Welton uns.com article attacking women in academia. And he didn't actually agree with the article, he just retweeted it. But Rasmussen has a history of these terrible racist and sexist views. So his provost has raked him over the coals. And so what do you think, Helen? Is this guy, I mean, he's said a lot of things that are some of the things he said are dubious. The article he tweeted was very interesting, although I don't think it was by the whole story by any means. So what do you think about this? That when the political correctness police go after a professor in this kind of situation, who do you sympathize with?
I sympathize with the professor. I mean, he comes off as kind of a douchebag in this article, but he has a constitutionally protected right to be a douchebag if he wants to. He's not hurting anybody. I mean, hurting people's feelings is not actually causing suffering. So yeah, douchebag, yes. Should he be fired? No. Should he be reprimanded by this sanctimonious jerk here? No. So yeah, it's if students don't like it, then don't take his class. That's a pretty easy thing to do. I think the fact that everybody is so upset that he wasn't fired just shows how people have become used to people being canceled, quote unquote, for the most mild offenses. I mean, retweeting an UNS article is now cause for being railroaded out the door. I don't in a world that is like that. And I admire this guy for at least standing up for himself. Like I said, he comes off as kind of a jerk, but that's here. End up for
Okay, now my internet connection is wavering a little bit.
Yeah, so is mine.
Okay, well, maybe it's yours.
Like talking about this.
Yeah, I wouldn't have thought this would be the most offensive story to whoever's in charge of messing with us, but who knows? In any case, the original article that he retweeted made an argument that was essentially saying that because of the different distribution in IQ between men and women, there are a lot more male idiots and more super high IQ male geniuses, and women toward to be more clustered towards the middle. Therefore, the academy is not having enough geniuses because they're bringing in too many women. And this, I think, among the many problems with this argument, one is that equating genius purely with the kind of IQ linear spatial mathematical reasoning may be a mistake. When we talk about the word genius, sometimes we think about these intuitive flashes of insight and creativity, which are the result of left and right hemisphere brain communication, according to the physical explanation. And actually, women have more of those than men. Women have a better connection between the two hemispheres than men. So I think there's a whole side of that that got missed in that article. But, you know, the way you win an argument these days, I guess, is you try to chase the other guy out of town and get him fired from his job.
Yeah, that's the problem. That's become the go-to route for anybody who disagrees with a standpoint or a view of somebody, is just to get them shut down instead of learning how to argue or debating or, you know, using rhetorical techniques to make your point seem like the more plausible one. People are just lazy. They don't want to do that anymore. And so they just pile on the guy. I mean, the fact that some random Twitter person can get this guy fired, or, well, not this guy, but get other professors fired for saying really mild things. I mean, it's not like he's calling for the extermination of all women or something. Like, it's really ridiculous. We've completely, yeah, we've just like completely lost our minds as a society that we allow this to go on so frequently. It's like once a week there's some big important figure getting canceled for like stepping on the wrong toes. It's really absurd.
It is. And, you know, I've actually considered moving somewhere. You know, so I get sick of the United States sometimes. I mean, this country is founded on these Enlightenment principles that are enshrined in the First Amendment and in the Bill of Rights in general. And it's been so trashed and abused, and you know, things have gotten so bad that I think, well, you know, maybe I should move somewhere else. And one of the places I've thought of going is my wife's homeland of Morocco. But guess what? Morocco isn't exactly a free speech paradise either. That people like to think that you can say anything you want as long as you don't criticize the king, but that's apparently not true anymore. They just sentenced a rapper to a year in prison, not for just criticizing the king, but supposedly for insulting the police. I always thought you could insult the police in Morocco, but maybe not anymore.
They've actually just passed a law in the U.S. I forget which municipality it was, but against insulting the police. So I guess that kind of repression is coming here too. I mean, it was always sort of unofficial. If you insult a cop, you're going to get arrested for resisting arrest. But yeah, this is pretty sad that this stuff is going on. I mean, it's like I guess I don't know if you expect it more in a country that is not part of the quote industrialized West, but you see stuff like this in France too. I mean, Alain Sorel is locked up for insulting one of the most cherished myths of the post World War II era. So it's it's unfortunate.
Yeah, it's a tough world for free speech. You know, the U.S. is losing it, but the rest of the world probably never had it in the first place. I was interested in the way this article from the AP discusses this issue. If we were in Iran and some Iranian were getting sentenced to prison for a similar kind of offense, and I believe that has happened a few times. They have these like punk rock gatherings among the young, like, you know, druggy, alcohol smoking, you know, whatever they are, the counterculture pissed off young people in Iran. And every now and then somebody, you know, gets arrested for some kind of offense, you know, like this. And of course, that's always trumpeted as a sign that Iran is a horrible theocratic dystopia. But here in Morocco, a U.S. protectorate or colony, when the same kind of thing happens, they say, well, there are some limits to free speech in Morocco, is the way they phrase it.
Yeah, it's pretty telling, the difference between the coverage of U.S. allies and U.S. enemies.
Yeah, and also, I mean, this article points out that Morocco does have a huge problem with hashish, hard drugs, alcohol, crime, homelessness, extreme poverty, and that's because it's a U.S. protectorate or colony, whereas Iran has none of that. Iran has essentially no homelessness, no extreme poverty whatsoever. They have a drug problem because the U.S. military is pumping opiates in from Afghanistan. They have a border with Afghanistan, but they execute drug dealers. And so Amnesty International says that they're terrible human rights abusers. And then they have, you know, little gatherings of their people who privately use the prohibited drugs, which include alcohol in Iran. The overall situation there is actually extremely positive compared to virtually all of the other Muslim countries, certainly compared to places like Morocco. And yet the coverage excuses all the problems in Morocco and just beats up on Iran for the good things it does.
Well, yeah, and I mean, the U.S. has no place to criticize because people get their cars blown up for investigating the wrong people. And I'm talking about Michael Hastings, whose head blew off before his car even hit the pole because someone remotely took control of his Mercedes. He was investigating John Brennan, the CIA director. So, and talking about homelessness too. I mean, the U.S. has more than 500,000 homeless people, and we're supposed to be like first world. Oh, we're the richest country in the world. Yeah, for who? So we have no right to criticize how other people run their societies. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't, but it also means that we shouldn't be surprised when it blows back on us, because
we shouldn't believe what our government tells us about the countries that our government doesn't like. Classic case in point, the Duma false flag chemical weapons incident that Fox News' Tucker Carlson has finally exposed. The first time the mainstream media has really gone there on this, as far as I know. Tucker finally got around to bringing on this UN whistleblower reporting Guardian journalist, and he's on record now exposing the Duma chemical weapons false flag. And so now the rest of the mainstream media and the power structure wants Fox to fire Tucker Carlson.
Yep, I wrote this article, and
I thought you might have.
Yeah, no, I admire Tucker for going there, because nobody else will. And it was really funny how badly he triggered some of these other people, because I think it was like the next morning, some guy, some liberal pundit was brought on Fox, one of the Fox morning shows, and they asked him, apparently Tucker said something about Michelle Obama possibly running for president. They asked, so what do you think about Michelle Obama running for president? And the guy's like, I can't believe you guys still have Tucker Carlson on the air. That's really terrible. I mean, you really shouldn't have him on the air. He's really bad. And the guy was, in his defense, he was trying to like get him back on topic. Like, I didn't bring you on to discuss Tucker Carlson, dude. I mean, like, come on. No, you need to take Tucker Carlson off. He's a terrible person. It's like, there are much worse people on air. Tucker Carlson is actually probably one of the best, which I never thought.
He's refreshing in a lot of ways.
Yeah. He'll bring on Tulsi Gabbard. He'll have anti-war people on. He had on like Anya Parampil, I think. He'll have on good people. You don't see that on TV. That's why they hate him.
Yeah, well, if he ever invites me on, I've gone up with Hannity and O'Reilly. I'd be happy to talk to Tucker. I wonder what he would say about 9/11. That's probably why I can't be on Tucker, is that he might not entirely disagree. At least he would probably be open to the idea of investigating it if he were allowed to say things like that in public, which of course he isn't. So let's move on to Mexico. Trump is about to launch drone strikes on Mexico. He's designating foreign terrorist orgs, namely the drug cartels, supposedly in the wake of a family of 9 U.S. citizens having been killed there a while back. So are we going to launch a war on Mexico?
I mean, that would be way going off script. It's really funny to watch the reactions to this, because everybody is basically saying, hey, you can't go off script like that, dude. Our enemies are sitting on the oil. They're not south of the border.
Oh, they got oil down there.
In Mexico? I didn't know that. Oh.
Yeah, Mexico's a big oil producer.
Okay, well, duh, my bad. Okay, so then that
they
got
oil, they got drugs, they got everything. The CIA.
I know they got the drugs, but that actually makes a lot more sense now. I take back my.
And Canada has tar sands, but don't tell Trump; he might get some ideas.
Yeah, I know Canada's got the tar sands. That stuff is nasty, but yeah, this is. I mean, yeah, the cartels are really running rampant there, but drone strikes are not going to solve the problem. Cartels by nature operate in civilian areas, and the last thing we need to do is be killing a bunch of innocent Mexicans so that Trump can look tough on crime.
I can't really disagree with that. Okay, so let's move back to the United States, where the ordinary folks are not really benefiting that much from this incredibly wealthy empire run by those Zionist billionaires and perhaps trillionaires that we talked about earlier. They're doing pretty well, but the average folks in the United States are losing life expectancy. Wait a minute, you look at those graphs throughout the entire, past few centuries or several centuries, life expectancy just keeps rising. Not anymore in the United States, it's going down. Why? Because working class white people are the one and only group that isn't just losing life expectancy, they're collapsing in life expectancy. They're dying like flies while they're still working age. It's, according to James Petrus, it's a genocide. He says there's a genocide of white working people, and he thinks the pharmaceutical companies intentionally put out opiates that were really good overdose killers in order to help perpetrate this genocide. So maybe there really is a white genocide. I actually wrote an article to this effect in American Free Press. So I guess I'm with all those crazy Nazi white nationalist idiots that I disagree with on most things in agreeing that in a sense there really is a white genocide.
Well, they did put out the OxyContin knowing full well that it was enormously addictive and pretending that it wasn't, and specifically sold it as providing
it's OD heaven. It's perfect for ODs.
They sold it as providing 12-hour pain relief when it actually only lasts for 8 hours, ensuring that people would become addicted and constantly be seeking more. So that was definitely a deliberate thing by Purdue Pharma. And but the problem is that this is our entire healthcare system has been building up to this point. Having for-profit healthcare encourages the development of drugs that are addictive, encourages the development of conditions or drugs to treat those conditions that will keep a patient coming back for eternity, so that the doctor gets paid. That this is not a specific thing about opioids. That's just a symptom of the larger problem. We need to get rid of the profit motive in healthcare, or else even if we come up with Medicare for all and everybody's got great health insurance, well, for one thing, it's going to cost zillions of dollars because America has the highest healthcare costs, well, the lowest quality in the developed world. So we need to knock down those costs and remove the profit motive, or else people are just going to keep dying.
I agree. And so one way to deal with this problem, though, is if indeed the working class has become a bunch of useless eaters, which is how the folks at that World Jewish Congress of Billionaires see things. Henry Kissinger has talked about useless eaters. What do you do with them? Well, you can give them opiates so they kill themselves. You can trash their way of life and insult them all the time so that they stop reproducing. Or maybe you could put them in virtual realities, have them online all the time, watching cat videos, or otherwise playing video games, or watching pornography, or otherwise indulging in the society of the spectacle. That's how they expect the average folks to keep amused in an age in which they've been totally made redundant by automation. Well, the cows are already getting virtual reality over in Russia. This cow probably will never understand the conspiracy to turn him into steak because this cow is living in a false reality. And somehow I think that we human beings are moving into the same pen.
Well, that's a great solution to stopping your uppity population from rising up and taking out the ruling class. I thought this was really interesting. I didn't write this one, but it's RT. Just slapping a virtual reality device on a cow because they produce nicer milk. I mean, there's so much.
What are they showing the cow in this? Are they showing the cow like beautiful green pastures?
I think that's what it said. I read this a few days ago, but I think that's what it said. Yeah, they're just and you can put people in the most horrible situations, and if you just provide them with bread and circuses, then they are not going to step out of line. And there's a lot of entertainment out there. I mean, the virtual reality industry is booming. I don't even know the details of this stuff. Every time I see a glimpse into it, I'm like both surprised and horrified. But that's definitely a great way to control population.
All right. Well, if any of you cows out there, and I am broadcasting from America's Dairyland, that's the state of Wisconsin, are interested in breaking out of your virtual reality and stampeding, breaking down the corral, and figuring out what's really out there in the real world, tune into False Flag Weekly News, and happy Thanksgiving to everybody. Be thankful that you can still get this kind of reporting. Please do help us out financially if you can. Someday it would be nice to be able to actually send a few bucks your way, Helen, because you're doing great work. You're a great co-host, and I appreciate the wonderful writing you do as well. What's your blog? Let's direct people.
HelenofDestroy.com, all one word. And you can find all my writing there, my RT articles, my other articles, and links to my various YouTube channel, Twitter, everything.
It's great stuff. Be thankful that it exists, and have a great Thanksgiving. See everybody next week.
Cows rise up.
Woo! All right.
Woo! Happy Thanksgiving, everybody.